Hey guys, tonight we step softly into a world scented with mystery and ancient ritual. Imagine yourself walking through a bustling Egyptian marketplace, the hot desert sun above, but your nose is treated to a tapestry of fragrances, sweet myrrh, spicy cinnamon, and the gentle whisper of lotus blooms carried on a warm breeze. You probably won't survive a day if you think this was just about smelling nice perfumes in ancient Egypt. We're a whole other kind of essential woven, deep into life, death, and everything in between. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, where are you watching from? Drop your location and local time below. I love imagining you all in your cozy corners of the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start by understanding that perfume in ancient Egypt was far more than a luxury or a simple charm. It was sacred, medicinal, even magical. Egyptians believed scent could connect them with the divine, a bridge between the mortal and the gods. Picture yourself holding a small vial of spiced oil. It isn't just a fragrance, it's a talisman, a prayer, a symbol of life itself. The very word they used for perfume, kifi, might not just mean fragrance, but also holy ointment. This connection between scent and spirituality was deeply ingrained. Egyptians burned incense in temples to please the gods, and they anointed themselves with scented oils to invite protection and health. But here's a fun twist. Historians still argue whether these perfumes were worn mainly to mask the less than pleasant odors of daily life. After all, hygiene was very different back then, or if the scents were truly treasured for their own sake. You might smile imagining a pharaoh's court, where the scent of sandalwood and frankincense masked the heat and dust, or perhaps they simply loved the perfumes as intensely as we adore designer colognes today. At the heart of all this is the Egyptian obsession with balance and harmony, known as ma'at. Perfume was no exception. Every scent was carefully crafted to please the senses and maintain cosmic order. Whether for love healing or divine favor, ancient Egyptians lived surrounded by scents that told stories, evoked emotions, and anchored their daily rituals. As you begin to unravel these fragrant mysteries, keep your senses open and your mind relaxed. This isn't a rushed history lesson, but a gentle stroll through the scented corridors of time, where every whiff carries meaning and magic. Now that you're settling into the fragrant world of ancient Egypt, let's take a leisurely wander along the trade routes that brought those captivating aromas to the bustling markets and temples. You might imagine a vast network of desert caravans, riverboats drifting slowly down the Nile, and even daring seafaring voyages, all transporting the precious ingredients that would become the perfumes you're beginning to savor in your mind. The Egyptians were remarkably well connected, importing rare resins like frankincense from the land of Punt, which might have been somewhere along the Horn of Africa, although historians still argue exactly where. Maybe you picture a caravan stretching miles across the sun-baked sands, the animals laden with sacks of precious resin, their handlers stopping for a rest, while the aroma of myrrh lingers in the air. This was no small feat. Frankincense and myrrh were so valuable they sometimes rivaled gold. These resins were harvested from thorny trees, and their transport was a high-stakes venture, guarded and treasured. But resins weren't the only goods making these journeys. Flowers like the sacred blue lotus were cultivated locally, but others, like cinnamon and cassia, came all the way from distant lands, like Sri Lanka and Southeast Asia. The sheer length of these trade routes boggles your mind. Before airplanes or even wheeled carts, these goods made slow, perilous journeys across continents. You might smile thinking how Instagram influencers would lose their minds following those ancient supply chains. An interesting tidbit is that Egyptians prized not just the scent, but also the symbolic meanings behind these materials. Frankincense was thought to carry prayers to the heavens when burned. Myrrh was linked to healing and embalming. The blending of these resins with local oils and herbs was a form of art as well as devotion. Trade wasn't a one-way street either. Egypt exported things like papyrus, linen, and grain, making it an economic hub in the ancient world. The perfume ingredients were part of this rich exchange that connected cultures across Africa, Asia, and even Europe. Historians still debate how much of this trade was state-controlled versus operated by private merchants or temple officials, but the scale and sophistication are undeniable. Imagine yourself tracing a tiny grain of frankincense from the thorny tree in the distant deserts, carried by traders, eventually dripping into a perfumer's bowl in Thebes. It's a journey spanning hundreds, sometimes thousands of miles, all for the pleasure of scenting the skin of pharaohs and priests. So next time you spritz your cologne, think of those arduous journeys, the ancient caravans weaving through desert sands, bringing magic in a bottle across continents. Now that you've followed the long roads and rivers that brought precious perfume ingredients to Egypt, let's wander quietly into the fields and groves where those aromatic treasures first came to life. Imagine yourself at dawn, the cool desert air still holding a hint of night's chill as harvesters begin their delicate work. You might think gathering these scents was a simple matter of picking flowers or scraping bark, but in reality, it was an intricate ritual, blending careful timing, sacred rites, and a deep respect for nature. Take frankincense, for example. This precious resin doesn't just flow freely like syrup. It oozes slowly from tiny cuts made in the bark of ancient trees, which grow mostly in harsh, rocky terrain far from the Nile's fertile banks. The harvesters had to return repeatedly, gently scraping away layers to collect the sticky resin without harming the tree. Too much an early lesson in sustainability, you might say. And as the resin hardened under the sun, it transformed into the fragrant tears prized across the ancient world. Harvesting wasn't just a physical task. Some records suggest ceremonies accompanied the collection of these resins, with offerings to the gods asking for their blessing on the harvest. You can almost hear the soft chants or see the slow movements of harvesters paying homage before beginning their work. This mix of labor and spirituality is so quintessentially Egyptian, it makes you wonder whether the scents themselves carried prayers whispered by the wind through branches. Then there were the flowers, like the iconic lotus and jasmine, plucked carefully in the cool mornings when their fragrance was at its peak. Lotus flowers held a special place in Egyptian culture, symbolizing rebirth in the sun's daily journey, so their harvesting was likely laden with meaning. Imagine yourself reaching out to gather these blossoms, their petals soft and cool, their scent faint, but intoxicating a natural perfume before any distillation. And here's a quirky detail. Some perfume ingredients were thought to have protective properties beyond their scent. For example, ancient Egyptians sometimes mixed crocodile dung into their cosmetics. Don't worry, not in perfumes to act as a kind of sunscreen or insect repellent. Historians still argue about how widespread and effective these practices were. But it sure shows that the ancient quest for personal care wasn't always what you'd expect. Even herbs like cinnamon and cassia had to be carefully dried and stored to preserve their delicate aromas. The timing of harvests was crucial. A flower picked too early or a resin gathered too late could lose its scent power, much like today's fine wines. Perfume was literally born from this dance of nature's clockwork and human patience. So as you picture yourself standing amidst these fragrant fields and thorny trees, remember each drop of perfume you'll later inhale was first a slow, careful gift from the earth, coaxed out with reverence and hands seasoned by generations of tradition. Now, you step quietly inside the perfume workshops, those bustling, fragrant rooms tucked away behind temple walls or nestled in the heart of ancient Egyptian towns. It's not like a modern factory with machines humming and conveyor belts clanking. No, here, artisans, mostly men, but some women too, worked with skilled hands, mixing and transforming raw ingredients into the oils, balms, and incenses that would grace the bodies of pharaoh's priests and common folk alike. The workshop hums with quiet activity. Small fires flicker under clay pots. Thick smoke curls as herbs are gently heated, and jars filled with golden oils glisten in the soft sunlight filtering through narrow windows. You might expect chaos, but there's order here, a carefully choreographed dance of measuring, blending, and patience. These artisans were part chemists, part alchemists, part priests, blending scents not just for beauty, but for health, magic, and religion. A curious fact, some perfume makers were closely linked to temples, which makes sense when you remember how deeply connected scent was to the divine. These workshops were almost sacred spaces where the boundary between craft and worship blurred. Perfumes made here could be offered as tributes to gods or used to anoint the bodies of the dead, preparing them for their journey beyond. You might chuckle, imagining a perfumer carefully weighing frankincense against a pile of crushed flowers, mumbling prayers or calculations. Historians still argue whether perfume making was an exclusive elite craft reserved for temple insiders, or if local merchants and households also had their own secret recipes bubbling away in smaller workshops. Tools of the trade were simple but effective stone mortars and pestles for crushing bronze knives, for cutting delicate petals, and shallow bowls where oils were gently warmed. The air was thick with the mingled scents of flowers, resins, and spices so intense that even a short stay in the workshop was like stepping into a cloud of scented magic. And here's a fun tidbit. Some perfume recipes called for unusual additives. One Egyptian text suggests the use of honey or even crushed beetles to enhance scent longevity. It's the kind of thing that makes you pause and wonder about their beauty standards. Thankfully, you won't find those ingredients in your modern bottle. These artisans mastered the art of blending, knowing that a perfume's power wasn't just in its smell, but in the balance of notes, the sharp brightness of citrus paired with the deep warmth of myrrh, or the soft sweetness of jasmine blending with earthy cedar wood. Each combination told a story or served a purpose, whether to entice, soothe, or sanctify. So as you breathe in this imagined workshop's rich aromas, think of the careful hands and devoted hearts that turned simple resins and flowers into treasures that would travel through history. Continuing your journey through the fragrant world of ancient Egypt, You now find yourself fascinated by the clever extraction techniques that transformed those raw materials into the potent perfumes the Egyptians so cherished. These methods were both surprisingly advanced and at times beautifully simple proof that even thousands of years ago, human ingenuity knew no bounds when it came to scent. First, you encounter cold, pressing a method you might find familiar if you've ever squeezed fresh citrus at home. In Egypt, certain oils, especially from flowers and seeds, were gently pressed by hand or with simple wooden presses to extract the precious essence without heat. This careful approach preserved the delicate aroma, capturing the purest notes of the flower or herb. Imagine the slight resistance under your hands as you press a pouch of crushed petals, the sweet oil slowly seeping out fragrant and precious. Then there's enfleurage, an elegant patient technique involving glass or wooden frames smeared with fragrant fats. Petals were carefully placed on these frames and replaced daily, allowing the fats to absorb their scent over time. You can almost hear the quiet rhythm of this ritual, the perfumer's hands lifting petals with care, layering fresh blossoms in waiting days or even weeks until the fats were saturated with the flower's essence. It's a slow dance, a test of patience rarely seen in today's fast-paced world. But heat extraction was also in play. Egyptians mastered the art of gentle heating simmering resins and herbs in oils to coax out their fragrant compounds. This wasn't just boiling. It was a delicate balance to avoid destroying the subtle scent molecules. You might picture a bronze pot warming over a fire steam, rising in soft curls, as the perfumer watches closely, careful not to overdo it. Here's a quirky detail. Historians still argue whether the famous Kifi incense was made primarily by cold infusion or by combining several extraction techniques. Some recipes call for boiling mixtures of resins and herbs in honey and wine, creating a rich, complex paste burned in temples and homes. You might smile imagining the slightly sticky hands of an Egyptian perfumer mixing this fragrant concoction, surrounded by buzzing bees or the clink of pottery jars. And let's not forget distillation. While this technique is often credited to later cultures like the Arabs, some scholars debate whether rudimentary forms of it existed in Egypt. Evidence is scarce, but the idea that Egyptians might have experimented with early forms of distillation adds a whisper of mystery to their scent mastery. All these methods, cold pressing, enfleurage, heating, and possibly distillation, combined to create perfumes with remarkable depth and longevity. These weren't fleeting aromas, but carefully crafted elixirs that lingered on skin fabrics and temple altars. So as you breathe in, the imagined scents emerging from these ancient techniques, appreciate the blend of art science and ritual that turned raw nature into pure olfactory magic. As you follow the trail of these ancient perfumes, you now enter the intimate world of oils, resins, and balms, the very heart of Egyptian fragrance craft. These were the building blocks, the concentrated essences that define the character of every scent, carefully combined and layered to create perfumes that whispered stories, healed bodies, and even warded off evil. Think of oils as the canvas, often olive oil or sesame oil, thick, nourishing, and fragrant in their own right. Egyptians prized these oils not only for their scent, but for their moisturizing and healing properties. You might imagine rubbing warm, scented oil into your skin after a long day, the cool Nile breeze accompanying the soft aroma, a little ritual to cleanse and soothe. And here's a historical fact: olive oil wasn't native to Egypt, but came through trade with the Mediterranean, showing once again how interconnected the ancient world was. Resins like frankincense and myrrh were the heartbeats of many perfumes, sticky aromatic gums that carried deep, complex scents. They were usually heated and dissolved into oils or melted into balms, transforming their intense, earthy aromas into smooth, wearable perfumes. Picture the slow melting of golden resin over a gentle flame, releasing clouds of fragrant smoke that could fill a temple or a royal chamber. Balms were thicker, often mixed with beeswax or other natural waxes, creating a solid base that could be applied like ointment. These balms had multiple uses. They sealed in moisture, protected skin from harsh sun and wind, and carried scents that lasted long after the sunset. Some balms were also used in embalming, helping preserve the body for the afterlife, proving perfume's role in both life and death. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Egyptian perfume balms included unusual ingredients like crushed pearls or even powdered minerals, perhaps to add shimmer or a subtle sparkle to the skin. Historians still argue how widespread these practices were and whether they were reserved for royalty or common folk. The blending of these elements required great skill. Too much resin could overwhelm the oil, too little, and the scent wouldn't last. The balance was a kind of fragrant alchemy, each mixture carefully adjusted to suit the wearer's need status or the occasion. Imagine the perfume maker eyes closed, inhaling a tiny dab of oil on their wrist, tweaking the blend until the perfect harmony emerged. This was no mere job. It was a sensory dance, a crafting of invisible stories told through scent. So as you picture these oils and balms warming softly in the palm of your hand, remember that every drop was a carefully crafted invitation to pleasure, to healing, to the sacred. Now, as the perfume oils and balms take shape, your journey leads you to the beautiful containers and packaging that held these precious scents, a world of artistry as delicate and intricate as the fragrances themselves. Imagine yourself handling a tiny, slender alabaster jar, its surface smooth and cool, designed to protect and honor the perfume within. Egyptians were masters of glassmaking and pottery, creating vessels that ranged from simple clay pots to exquisitely carved alabaster bottles, some so slender they seemed almost too fragile to hold their liquid treasures. These perfume containers were often decorated with lotus motifs, hieroglyphics, or the graceful shapes of birds and gods, turning a simple jar into a work of art. Handling one of these, you'd feel the weight of history and beauty in your hand, like holding a secret whispered through centuries. Here's a fun fact. Many containers had tiny stoppers designed to fit perfectly, preventing precious perfume oils from evaporating or spilling in the desert heat. Some were even crafted with double chambers, allowing different scents to be stored separately and blended only when applied. You might chuckle, imagining an ancient Egyptian version of a modern-day mix-your-own fragrance kit. Materials mattered a lot. Alabaster was prized for its coolness and opacity, which helped protect light-sensitive oils. Glass vessels made from early thick glass were sometimes colored and adorned, symbolizing status and wealth. Pottery jars were more common among everyday people, but still crafted with care. Historians still argue whether some of these containers were reused from older vessels or custom-made for specific perfumes. But either way, the attention to detail is clear. And packaging wasn't just practical, it was a statement. Pharaohs and nobles had containers sealed with wax and inscribed with their names or titles, making perfume part of their personal brand, if you will. Imagine gifting a friend a delicate bottle shaped like a papyrus stalk, a present that said, "I see you and I value you." Transporting these fragile jars safely was another challenge. Some were wrapped in linen or kept in wooden boxes, lined with soft materials, showing an early understanding of delicate logistics. Those same containers would later be buried with their owners, ensuring that scent followed them into the afterlife. So, as you imagine the tactile sensation of lifting a cool alabaster bottle to your lips, remember, these vessels were more than mere containers. They were precious guardians of scent, artfully crafted to preserve and honor the magic inside. Now that you've held the delicate perfume containers in your hand, picture yourself stepping into the daily rhythms of ancient Egyptian life, where perfumes were not just luxuries, but essential parts of morning routines, social gatherings, and personal rituals. Imagine waking to the soft light filtering through linen curtains as you anoint your skin with fragrant oils, the scents mingling with the warm Nile breeze and the distant call of a heron. Perfume was everywhere, in the bustling streets, in homes, in temples, and even on children and pets. You might smile thinking of an ancient Egyptian pet dog, proudly wearing a collar scented with sweet myrrh. Applying perfume was a form of self-care, a moment to connect with the body and spirit before stepping out into the day's heat and dust. Men and women alike used scented oils, but the application differed. Some anointed their hair, others their wrists and necks, even their sandals. Perfumes helped keep insects at bay, a practical benefit in the river valley's humid climate. Imagine slipping your sandal on and catching a faint whiff of cedarwood and lotus, a small pleasure in a long day. Perfume also played a role in social rituals. Guests arriving at a home might be greeted with a fragrant fan, waved gently, a sign of welcome and respect. At banquets, scented cones of wax, or fat perfumed with ingredients like henna or cinnamon, were placed atop the heads of guests, slowly melting and releasing aromas. You might chuckle, picturing a noble arriving with a delicate cone, dripping fragrant oil down their temple, a subtle natural cologne. Here's a curious detail historians still argue about how common these wax cones really were, whether they were everyday adornments or reserved for special occasions and the elite. Regardless, the idea evokes a vivid image of a society steeped in scent. Perfume was also essential for cleanliness, especially in a culture that prized ritual purity. After bathing in the Nile or local pools, anointing with oils was a way to seal moisture and scent, leaving the skin soft and subtly fragrant. This was more than vanity. It was a spiritual act, a way to present oneself in harmony with Ma, the cosmic order. As you imagine these personal rituals unfolding, you sense how perfume wove through daily life, a gentle, invisible thread connecting body, spirit, and society. It wasn't just about smelling good. It was about feeling balanced, protected, and connected. So next time you splash on your favorite scent, remember that in ancient Egypt, this simple act was a sacred ritual, an embrace of self and the divine. Carrying on from daily uses, you now drift deeper into the sacred role. Perfumes played in religious and funerary contexts, the invisible bridge between the living and the divine, and even the gateway to the afterlife. Picture the flickering glow of temple lamps, incense smoke, curling upward, carrying prayers on scented wings to distant gods. Perfumes weren't mere accessories. They were offerings, Priests anointed statues of deities with fragrant oils, believing the scents would please and awaken the gods' presence. Imagine standing quietly in a temple's cool shadow, the air thick with myrrh and frankincense, as the high priest dips his fingers into a golden oil, gently touching the statue's face. This was worship in its most intimate form. Funerary rituals used perfumes in even more profound ways. Egyptians believed the soul's journey after death depended on purity and divine favor. Perfumes were applied to the body to purify and protect it, helping preserve the deceased for eternity. You might recall the connection with embalming practices, where resins and balms doubled as both scent and preservation agents. And here's a fascinating bit. Some tomb paintings show servants carrying large vessels of scented oils, ready to anoint the mummy or the sarcophagus. These illustrations suggest perfumes were part of a complex ritual choreography, reinforcing the idea that scent was as vital as words or gestures in these ceremonies. Historians still argue about the exact formulas used in funerary perfumes, as many ingredients were rare or symbolic. Some believe the scents were carefully chosen to invoke specific gods or protective spirits, while others think they served more practical functions, like masking the odor of decay, though you'd hope they lean toward the spiritual. Perfume also had a symbolic role in rebirth. The lotus, whose scent permeated many perfumes, symbolized resurrection and the sun's daily rebirth. By scenting the dead with lotus-infused oils, Egyptians were perhaps weaving the hope of new life directly into their funeral rites. Imagine the comforting, serene atmosphere these fragrances created in the tomb chambers, a sensory veil between worlds. The very air was a prayer, a blessing, and a promise that life transcended death. So as you breathe in the imagined scent of ancient temples and tombs, know that perfumes were more than fragrances. They were sacred links to eternity itself. Now, as you continue your slow exploration, let's focus on how perfume crossed gender lines in ancient Egypt. Picture the streets and homes, alive with fragrance, where both men and women embraced scents, but in sometimes surprisingly different ways. Men weren't just dabbling in cologne. They often wore perfumes as symbols of status power and even seduction. Pharaohs and nobles might be covered head to toe in fragrant oils before public appearances. You might imagine a royal procession, the air heavy with musk and myrrh, the scent announcing authority as much as the golden crown. Perfume was part of the masculine image, a marker of refinement. Women, on the other hand, used perfumes not only to enhance beauty, but also as part of their health and ritual practices. Ancient texts mention fragrant ointments linked to fertility and love, highlighting how scent intertwined with sensuality and spirituality. You could picture a woman preparing for a festival, anointing her skin with jasmine and rose oils, the scent inviting admiration and divine favor alike. Interestingly, some fragrances were considered unisex, while others were gender-specific. Frankincense and cedarwood might be favored by men, while floral scents like lotus and jasmine were preferred by women. However, historians still argue to what extent these preferences were strict rules or flexible customs shaped by context, status, or occasion. Perfume also played a role in gendered rituals. For example, priests often wore specific scents during ceremonies, sometimes different from those used by laypeople, highlighting a sacred masculinity or femininity tied to their roles. Some women, especially in the upper classes, might have had personal perfumers, or even workshops devoted to crafting their unique scents. Here's a quirky detail: in some cases, men wore eyeliner mixed with scented oils, blending beauty and fragrance in one subtle gesture. Historians debate whether this was purely aesthetic or also carried symbolic meanings like protection or allure. The cultural appreciation of perfume crossed simple gender binaries, weaving scent into complex identities and social expectations. It was about more than smelling nice. It was about expressing self-status in connection to tradition. So as you imagine the fragrant haze surrounding ancient Egyptian men and women, know that scent was a shared language, rich with meaning and nuance, whispering stories of power, love, and faith, flowing naturally from gender and ritual. Let's gently explore how perfumes stepped beyond mere adornment to serve healing and medicinal purposes in ancient Egypt. Imagine yourself in a quiet room, the faint scent of herbs and resins swirling around, where a healer or priestess blends fragrant concoctions designed to comfort and cure. Perfumes in Egypt weren't just about pleasure. They were deeply entwined with wellness. Oils infused with aromatic plants were used to soothe ailments like headaches, muscle pain, or digestive troubles. You might picture a healer gently massaging warm scented oil into tired limbs, the blend of herbs calming the body and spirit alike. One historical fact: the famous Aber's papyrus, an ancient Egyptian medical text, includes numerous recipes mixing perfumes and herbal remedies, showing how fragrance and medicine often walked hand in hand. Ingredients like myrrh and frankincense, while prized for their scent, were also valued for antiseptic and anti-inflammatory properties. Here's a curious tidbit: some perfumes doubled as protective barriers against disease or pests. For example, smearing scented oils on skin could repel insects, pretty useful in a land where mosquitoes and flies were a constant nuisance. Historians still argue how effective these methods truly were, but the intent is clear. Perfumes were sometimes burned or diffused during healing rituals, with smoke believed to cleanse spaces and invite benevolent spirits. Imagine the soft flicker of oil lamps casting shadows as fragrant incense curls upward, a sensory cocoon of comfort and protection. Interestingly, perfume ingredients like cinnamon, cassia, and even honey, often found in scent blends, had known healing qualities, highlighting the Egyptians' keen observation of nature's gifts. These weren't random mixes, but carefully crafted balms, combining the soothing with the sacred. So as you imagine these ancient healing sessions, let your senses relax into the warmth and calm that fragrant oils brought, reminding us that perfume was medicine for both body and soul. Section 12, Perfume's Economic and Social Status. Trace how fragrances signaled wealth class and power across society. Let's continue by drifting into the economic and social worlds shaped by perfume in ancient Egypt. Imagine grand marketplaces where jars of fragrant oils are exchanged alongside grains, linen, and precious metals, a bustling hub where scent was not just a luxury, but a marker of wealth and power. Perfume was in many ways a currency of status. The more rare and complex the scent, the higher your social standing. Pharaohs and nobles surrounded themselves with perfumes that spoke of their prestige and divine favor. You might picture a noblewoman slipping into a perfumed chamber, the air thick with exotic aromas imported from faraway lands, each scent a subtle declaration of her influence. Here's a notable fact: perfume production and trade were often controlled by temples, and the state giving them significant economic power. Temples not only used perfumes for rituals, but also managed workshops and trade routes, blending spiritual and commercial interests in a fascinating way. But perfume wasn't just for the elite. Common people used simpler, locally made scents. You can imagine small-scale merchants selling modest oils at market stalls, offering affordable fragrances that allowed everyday Egyptians a taste of luxury. Historians still debate the extent to which perfume use permeated all social classes, but evidence suggests it was widespread, with variations in quality and quantity. The perfume trade created jobs for many harvesters, artisans, traders, scribes, and even scribes who kept detailed records of production and shipments. It was a complex industry, fueling the economy and supporting entire communities. A quirky detail to ponder: some perfumes were taxed heavily, and perfume containers sometimes bore official stamps or seals, indicating authenticity and origin. This early branding and regulation hinted at a sophisticated market concerned with quality and counterfeits, a problem as old as commerce itself. So as you imagine the fragrant lanes of ancient Egyptian markets and the grandeur of palace-perfumed halls, you're glimpsing a world where scent was woven deeply into economic and social life, a fragrant currency of connection, power, and identity. As you wander further into the scented corridors of power, imagine the extravagant perfumes favored by royalty, the pharaohs and queens, whose very presence was accompanied by clouds of rare and luxurious aromas. These scents were not only personal indulgences, but powerful symbols of divine kingship and wealth, meant to dazzle the senses and affirm their status as living gods. Pharaohs had access to the most exotic ingredients, some imported from distant lands, like incense from Punt spices from Arabia, or rare flowers from the Mediterranean. Imagine a royal chamber filled with the rich mingling scents of ambergris, cinnamon, and myrrh, each chosen for its rarity and symbolism. These perfumes were often layered, creating complex olfactory signatures unique to each ruler. Queen Nefertari, for example, was famed not just for her beauty, but for her legendary perfume collection. Her tomb paintings depict scenes of servants carrying precious vessels of scented oils, suggesting that fragrance was as much part of her identity as her royal robes. Historians still argue how much control queens had over perfume production versus relying on court artisans, but their importance in court life is undeniable. A fun fact: some royal perfumes included rare ingredients like musk derived from animals, which were so costly that only the highest echelons could afford them. These scents were sometimes used during public ceremonies to announce the arrival of royalty, or during private rituals to maintain divine favor. Perfumes also served diplomatic roles. Gifts of rare scents were exchanged between courts, a fragrant language of alliance and respect. You might picture a delicate alabaster bottle wrapped carefully in linen traveling miles as a token of goodwill. As you imagine these royal scents wafting through ancient palaces, think of perfume not just as fragrance, but as a royal signature, a powerful and portable expression of majesty and mystery. Wandering into the artistic and literary realms, you begin to see how perfumes wove themselves into Egypt's creative fabric. Picture papyrus scrolls covered in elegant hieroglyphs describing fragrant offerings to gods, or vivid tomb paintings where servants pour oils from delicate jars, their colors and scents almost palpable across millennia. Perfume was a favored subject in poetry and song. You might imagine an ancient lyricist composing verses praising the intoxicating aroma of lotus blossoms or the sweet promise of cinnamon in a lover's embrace. These scented images weren't mere decoration. They conveyed emotion, desire, and spirituality in a culture where the senses were pathways to meaning. Here's an intriguing fact. Some myths credited gods themselves with the invention of perfume, a divine gift to humanity. For instance, the goddess Hathor was associated with beauty and scent, often depicted surrounded by fragrant flowers and oils. These stories elevated perfume beyond the earthly to the cosmic, connecting scent to creation myths and divine favor. Artists also painted scenes of perfume making and application, giving us a rare glimpse into the daily lives and rituals of ancient Egyptians. In tombs, you can see servants carrying lotus flowers or pouring scented oils onto altars, visual narratives that celebrate the importance of fragrance as both a practical and spiritual element. Historians still debate the extent to which these artistic depictions reflected real-life practices versus idealized or symbolic representations. Were the elaborate perfume rituals shown in tombs common, or were they aspirational? The mystery lingers, adding to the allure. As you trace your fingers along imagined papyrus scrolls or gaze at painted walls, you realize perfume was more than scent. It was a muse, an inspiration that permeated every layer of Egyptian culture, from the mundane to the divine. So, as you drift through these artistic echoes, let yourself be carried by the gentle whispers of scented poetry and colorful stories, a timeless dance of fragrance and creativity. Finally, as your scented journey through ancient Egypt nears its gentle close, take a moment to reflect on the legacy of these perfumes and the lingering mysteries that still captivate historians today. Though thousands of years have passed, the essence of Egyptian fragrance continues to perfume our modern imaginations, inspiring perfumers, historians, and dreamers alike. We know a great deal about Egyptian perfume, from archaeological finds, fragments of jars, residue in tombs, and written recipes etched onto papyrus. But there are still puzzles wrapped in the fragrant haze. Historians debate exactly how certain techniques were performed, how widespread perfume use was among different social classes, and the precise meanings behind the many symbolic ingredients. The secrets of some ancient formulas remain tantalizingly out of reach, like lost melodies whispered on the wind. Think of the perfume vessels you've imagined, delicate alabaster jars, or tiny glass bottles, now silent relics telling stories without words. Modern perfumers sometimes try to recreate kai-fi and other ancient scents, blending historical texts with guesswork, walking a fragrant tightrope between history and artistry. And here's a charming tidbit. Some ancient Egyptian perfumes were said to be aphrodisiacs, or magical charms, leading to lively debates on whether scent was science, superstition, or a little of both. Historians still argue, but that ambiguity only adds to the allure. The influence of Egyptian perfumes stretches beyond their own time-shaping fragrance traditions across the Mediterranean and Near East, leaving a scented fingerprint on cultures far and wide. Their delicate art reminds us that scent is a powerful connector between people, between worlds, and across the ages. So as you breathe in this imagined legacy, allow the warmth and mystery of ancient Egyptian perfumes to lull you into calm. The scents may have faded from the earth, but their stories remain softly lingering in the quiet spaces of history and dreams. Now, as you settle deeper into the soothing embrace of night, let the images of sunlit desert groves fragrant temples, and cool alabaster jars gently fade into the calm stillness around you. Each scent you've imagined tonight, whether the sweet lotus, the smoky myrrh, or the warm amber, was more than a fragrance. It was a quiet ritual, a tender touch between earth and spirit life and afterlife. Allow your breath to slow softening with every inhale, releasing with each gentle exhale. The ancient world of perfumes becomes a comforting veil, wrapping you in harmony, in balance, inviting your mind to drift peacefully beyond time. Rest easy knowing that these fragrant stories, whispered through ages, now become part of your own quiet journey. Let the soft hum of the night cradle you, and may your dreams be sweet perfumed with the echoes of history's tender touch. Sleep well, and until next time, good night.